Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today we're diving into New Orleans' vibrant culture to explore the innovative mind behind Culturalyst, a platform reshaping the city's artistic landscape. My guest is a sculptor, technologist, and writer, as well as the founder of Culturalyst. Please welcome Sam Bowler. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on. This is going to be really cool. We were able to chat a little bit before getting into the main thing. No one's going to get any of that audio. But before we get into the sort of main crux of this conversation and the main themes here, I'm going to give you the space to, introduce yourself and describe your current work. And I think it's some value in it. And some people may think that you already said this, you already did this in the intro. But I think how a person describes themselves has a lot of power and weight to it. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Well, this is a pleasure. So thank you again. My name is Sam Bowler. I live in New Orleans. I've been here for about 13 years. And my current work is focused on how do we build a future that takes care of artists. And I'm doing that. I'm based in New Orleans, and sort of this idea came to be while I lived here, but also the seed of it from growing up. I grew up in a family where my mother was a writer, my dad was a businessman, but the melding of those two, I've just been a firm believer that art is a pathway that leads you to yourself and to other people. And our society needs more of those type of pathways. And my mother passed when I was 15, and what she taught me before she passed was basically like, here's how to process emotion. Get it out, emote and process it through art. So I've been writing, basically my whole life. And then recently got into sculpture, I guess more recently, but that is a big guiding principle for me, is that art is good for your soul and it's good for cities. And I live in a city that the cultural economy here generates $10 billion per year of tourism spending. So that means there's 19 million tourists that come to New Orleans every year to consume its culture. And they spend $10 billion while they're here. But the average artist is making about $19,000 a year. And rent has gone up 75% in the last 5 years. So the economics of the cultural economy here don't make sense. And my current work is called Culturalyst, and we're building digital infrastructure that makes it easy to find artists anywhere. So you can think of that kind of like Craigslist, where Craigslist made it really easy to find couches and cars. Yep. And standardized how classifieds work in different cities. And we want to do the same thing for how artists are found locally, and also how opportunities for artists are found. Grants, call to artists, residencies. We think that there should just be a network that exists connecting every single city, where both somebody driving through can say, let me see all the poets in New Orleans, as well as the poets that are there can get notified about any grants or residencies that they're eligible for that might be floating around the country. Because that kind of infrastructure doesn't exist right now. And as a result, it's harder than it should be to be an artist locally. And so I'm trying to change that.
Thank you. Wow. And that is absolutely a much needed pursuit. I find many places or entities that are in those sort of spots of, we don't want to call them gatekeepers, but they have sort of that position. They act in that way, and that leads to ideas around scarcity, especially with places that have a lot of, you can throw a rock and run into a creative, you know what I mean? It's sort of that energy. And I see it up here, and that's all in Baltimore. And I see it in the small pockets in those instances where I go down to New Orleans, and, it's almost like the sort of being baptized or what have you through like the creative waters. I feel that when I go there, and being able to do my creative thing. And, as I was sharing with you a little bit earlier before we got started, of being able to go down there and just feel like I'm around creatives. There's just this constant, thick creative energy that's just there. Everything else doesn't really matter. I'm able to get my stuff in and go down there to be a journalist, a documentarian, or whatever one might call it, but be able to have cool conversations and it feels familiar. And it reminds me of Baltimore, and it's because of the people and the creativity that's just everywhere. Um, so I want to ask this sort of like secondary questions relates. Were there any stops within your background that, has, you mentioned your parents who will have you sort of the business side, sort of the creative side with your mom's writing. Speak a bit on maybe previous stops, like before coming to New Orleans, you're from Texas, right?
Dallas, Texas. Yep.
And were there any other stops during this time that, you kind of see showing up in how you approach your work or different sensibilities in your writing or even now in your sculpture? Talk about that a little bit.
That's a great question. So I was born in Dallas, Texas. I've got two older sisters. Shout out to Sarah and Ann. And but I'm the only one in my family born in Texas. So lots of people can claim Texas like deep, deep roots. I can't do that. So my mother was British and Canadian. So we'd spent a lot of time in Canada, and then we moved to London when I was 5 to be by her family and for my dad's work. And I was there till I was 8 or so. I think that I then arrived back to Texas being this like weird. My hair was really long, and I arrived at this like very conservative Texas elementary school, and all the like jock boys made fun of me because I had really long hair. And it was just kind of this like, I've just come from this like incredibly creative, just like by being on the subway, by walking around the city, you're just like seeing, people that are expressing themselves differently than like one neighborhood in Texas might. So, and I think that I brought, there was a lot of pride in that. My family was like, kind of like held on to that in Texas. So I feel like that was a really influential part of how I think about the world, is like that it's hold on to your differences and hold on to the things that, might otherize you from the status quo, because that's where things get interesting. And that's where you can like sort of have a unique perspective. And I'm really grateful for that. I think that that was a big part of what was encouraged in us. So yeah, and then I went to college in North Carolina. I went to Duke, and I expected Duke to be, had never been there. I ran track in high school, and Duke recruited me. So I went there sight unseen, because I went to the kind of high school that's like really intense on, where you went to college. And so I wasn't really thinking a lot about like, is this the right fit for me? It was just like, I got in, let's go. And then expected Duke to be this like intellectual environment where people were like, having like the conversations spilling onto the quad, and like people wearing berets, and like, having like existential conversations about, liberal ideas. And it just really wasn't that. And it was lots of frat parties, and I was like very disillusioned. And then I think another big stop in my college career that got me thinking about things differently was there was a retreat in college that basically was just like, let's talk about race, gender, and identity issues. And in a campus of like, I think 4,200 undergraduates, there were 100 people that went on this retreat, and there were only 2 white men, which is like not the demographics of the campus.
Right.
And so it's like the really clearly that like the white men of campus like didn't have to think about these things. So they didn't opt into this kind of retreat. And I sort of got plugged into it because I was unhappy. And like somebody was like, hey, you should check this out because it's a community of different people that you might not meet in the circles that you're running with. And I was super grateful for that. It sort of changed how I thought, like the people I met in college changed how I thought about the university, and really changed like a lot of my idea of how I wanted to do work. So yeah, those are some like influential stops that I think have informed. And throughout that, it's like, how can I remember who I am and where I've come from, and hold on to these different sort of perspectives gleaned from different experiences.
Good. Thank you. And, you kind of touched on one of those things where, and I used to have a question I would use regularly of, like embracing one's weirdness. I think that's those unique traits that make us us. Like, for me, I'm a 6'4" black guy that's a certain age from a certain place that likes these things. So naturally, references come up in conversation. Like I like wrestling, for instance, right? And I'm like, yeah, man, I jobbed this thing out. And someone that's supposed to get it, they'll get it because they know the sort of thing. But it's like just embracing it. Whereas in the past, I would shy away from saying things that were that and would feel like stilted and unnatural. And it's like, I'm sending the representative. So going back to the feeling thing you touched on, and also embracing one's weirdness and figuring out who you are and just being who you are. It's a lot of importance there.
Yeah, I think it's like the lifelong work. Hey, it's like that I think about that a lot. I just yesterday went for a walk after a call because like right now I'm meeting with a bunch of cities to say like, how do you support your artists? And do you want to join this network that we're building in Culturalyst? But before I just like had this call, and then I went for this walk and was like, did I bring my full self to that call? Like was I like kind of irreverent and a little jokey and because that's how I like to be. And so why don't I bring that to these calls instead of just like having this very buttoned up approach where like I'm acting or puppeting what I think they want me to be like to like, hope that they respect me or like respect the work or whatever. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about is like, how do we just bring ourselves more, the full scope of our humanity to these calls? Cause like, what are we doing if we're not, and it's like, yeah. So I think it's cool. You brought that up and we're thinking about the same thing.
Yeah. I think, when I talk with different folks and, they're especially in like the sort of podcast space, I think, folks are always looking for the personality. Who is the person behind it? And that's what I try to achieve. And, some of the questions I have, ask, even the rapid fire stuff, who's the person, show some of the personality and within this sort of framework. And I find that like people value it, but they want to shift it at times. I was asked to do a talk about why I started the podcast overall. And I was very honest about why I started. And I'll say it here. Trump said some goofy stuff about Baltimore and I didn't like it. And I wanted to disprove it. And, the organizer was like, can you take the Trump stuff out? I was like, so change the narrative of the start of this podcast while describing the start of this podcast. I was like, that's kind of taking me out of it, I guess. And I don't want to do the sanitized thing. I don't want to do the perfect thing. And I think in terms of art, creativity, and sort of authenticity overall, it's never perfect.
Yeah. What you just said there about like, you want to be honest. It's like, that's what I think it is. It's like, I want to say the truth. And if I speak from that place, whether about my work, about myself, about what I am caring about, thinking about, then as opposed to like what I think somebody else wants to hear. If I'm saying the truth according to me, and I'm going to learn more, one, and two, it's just going to come out like that's something that we connect with. People can hear it. And when you're telling the truth for yourself, and they might not agree with it, but they can hear it better than if you're just trying to package something in a way that is meant to achieve some goal, like selling something or, getting more people to listen or whatever it might be.
And we're sold stuff all the time at this point, whether it's through the social media, whether it's through just apps that you're not going to pay for the professional version, I'm paying for the free version, and it's there. And I think we're always looking for something real and that honesty, and that's what folks kind of expect from me and what I'm doing. And at times it's like, I don't know if this is interesting to me, let's say a particular topic or maybe someone's work, but I may see value in it from a different lens. And I articulate that when I'm having these conversations. It's just like, I don't know how qualified I am for some of the things that, I reach out and do, but ultimately it's like the professionalism shows through, me being honest shows through, and it always turns out well. So it's just something there. So I want to move into this next question. You were touching on a little bit here, but talk about like starting Culturalyst. Like, what was that moment, if you will? It was like, I need to be the person that's doing this, or I need to really commit time and energy to this. Because, I stated, my thing of Trump said something. Well, where's my mic? Where's my recorder?
Yeah, right. But yeah, when you said Trump said some silly things, that's a generous way of putting it. Silly is the generous way. But yeah, let me think. I mean, it's very much culturalist is very much in line with my theory of change, which is basically like we need to connect people to themselves and each other. That's kind of like I have that written like right above my desk. And so culturalist is a pathway to do that. I think when it came to this specific project and the way it works, there was sort of 3 moments for me. I moved to New Orleans and was trying to connect with other people who do sculpture work because it's expensive there's equipment and stuff that's expensive. And I just come from a studio in college where I had access to this stuff. And so I wanted to tap in. So I reached out to the Arts Council here saying, is there a directory that I could reference? They said they had one, but they shut it down because it was too hard to maintain. Then I did some Googling on my own and found a couple names, but most of them were out of my league or like were just like really established or didn't live here anymore. So it took me several months to like really understand and be able to like begin to tap into the community of sculptors down here. So that was the first light bulb of like, this is a creative city full of artists, world famous for, like you spoke to earlier, there's just like a creative energy down here.
Yeah.
And yet it's hard to find the artists. And yet those artists likely want to be found because that's how they could make a livelihood. So why is that so hard? That was the first light bulb. The second was learning how little artists were making despite the cultural economy being the size that it is. At the time, it was just shy of 7 billion a year. Since it's grown to 10 billion, and artists' income levels haven't changed since 2016 or so, when this idea first sort of came to be for me. And then the third light bulb moment for me was I was a school teacher. I taught 7th grade writing, and I had a couple students in the class that had been really failed by the education system in Louisiana. There's a whole bunch of, there's a whole other story there. But these kids, I remember this kid was sitting in the back of the class, and I tried multiple lessons, and this was a very angry child because he just needed some like one-on-one time and love and care from a teacher, as opposed to just like getting handed assignments or packets and not being, really taught well. The one lesson all year that worked was like a free writing or a free drawing lesson. And so I just watched art unlock this child in a way that reminded me of how just like that feeling of being able to participate where there's no wrong answer, where like the only wrong answer is to not even try. It gets me emotional. It's just like such a powerful thing, and it's such a human thing. And so for us to encourage more, like we want that child to grow up to be an artist. Yeah. Even if they're not like, if they don't have they're not like a professional artist where they're full-time making their money from their art, they could be working an office job and still have a creative practice. So we just like it's good for the soul to be expressing yourself. And so culturalist is a manifestation of all these ideas put together. Is let's make it easy for artists to exist in a city. So if you're an artist in a city, you can get a free website. You can get all the notifications about all the grants you want. People arriving in the city can easily find you, and then we want to connect it all in a network. So we make it easier than it is right now. And this is just the start. The goal is to have every high school student in New Orleans get a free portfolio website that they can just be adding to, from freshman year on. And so that we start giving students these creative tools that they can have forever. And that there's this infrastructure that's not profit motivated, that just exists for artists to use and tap into, paid for by the institutions that we already pay our tax dollars to, which is these arts councils. Yeah. So their technology is not that it's not expensive to host anymore. It used to be, but because it's so ubiquitous, it's not expensive to host data. And so this infrastructure can be provided to a small town in the Bayou region of Louisiana. It can also be provided to New Orleans, And so why don't we just do that? And that's kind of those three light bulb moments in combination with just sort of my theory of change made me dig in, learn how to code, built the first prototype. Took me a year and a half to get, the first city on board. And now we're in 12 cities. And again, like I said, we're talking to lots of states and cities right now. And yeah, I'm excited. It's exciting. It's been really hard. It's been like a crucible for, for like my ego. But it's clearly, I think this is where I'm supposed to be, for now. And I need to trust that more and more because I keep choosing it. So, yeah, and I believe in what we're trying to do.
That's wonderful. I love hearing it. It's inspiring. It connects. I see like overlap in how I'm approaching my stuff, and what the aspirations are, and what I've been working toward. And I hear that coming from you. And yeah, sometimes I have to, try not to be as idealist as I am at times, but that's my natural preset. And I'm just like, well, the reason it didn't happen because it wasn't a priority. You know what I mean? And I do that, or I even call it other things, like when I may pitch something that is, beneficial for the community, beneficial for the arts community, and I get either some version of no. It's like a nicely worded canned email of rejection. And I'm like, okay, not to have that ego crush. I'm like, they just don't have the vision. Whereas I can talk to someone that is at a high level, and they may not be in Baltimore or in the sort of same lane. And they'll say, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We're going to nip that idea. I was like, cool, do it there. Credit me, whatever. But it is one of those things. And it's because it's not a priority, or they don't have the vision. And I just keep kind of working at my stuff. Like, I tell people that this is not a funded project, for the most part. I got a piece here to do this and that. And, podcasting and equipment and all of that stuff has different costs. And to keep it going, it needs sort of that intersection of creativity and business.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, Rob, you're like a perfect example of what we're working for, is like somebody who has a really clear vision of what they want to put into the world, and the impact your work is having on countless people that you're not only interviewing, but who are listening to these interviews. Like the ripple effect of the work is like, you can't even quantify it. It's like, and that's what is the magic, is like, we're here and we're alive, and we're like figuring stuff out for ourselves and for our communities, and to share that is like, that's really what we want more of. And where there's not these like correct answers or homogenized approaches, it's like, we just want everyone to be doing their thing. And the more folks doing that, the better things get, for lack of a better way to describe that, just like the better things are.
So is there, and you've spoken it a bit, is there, like, when you think of sort of impact or what have you, right? And I say that with the inverted commas or quotes, like a piece of impact around Culturalyst that kind of sticks out for you, like, sort of, you touched on the expansion, 6 years in, right? And things of the sort, and even sort of just that inspirational component. And I think there's a lot of impact in providing like sort of those resources and that infrastructure. But what else comes to mind for the folks that are out there who are like, I'm not sure, I want to know more, what have you? What comes to mind for you when you think about the impact?
I think one story comes to mind. We did this activation during Jazz Fest here. Jazz Fest is a 2-day, over 2 weekends in April and May, and it's this massive festival, and we get a whole influx of people into New Orleans. And so what we did was we chose, I think like 30 or 40 artists, and we made these big posters for them, where I could show you, but people on the podcast can't see it. But it's basically this almost like 3 foot tall, 2 foot, 2.5 foot wide poster with just whatever. We reached out to the artists and said, send us whatever photo you want. And artists sent us their work, or like a really beautiful headshot. And we just linked to a website of their choosing, like their Instagram or their website, or some use their Culturalyst portfolio pages. But then we put them up in this sort of gallery on the street, and we had 3,500 people walk through every day. And this artist pulled up, like this car like came around really quickly and like pulled up outside, and this whole family jumped out. And I was like across the street talking to somebody else about like what Culturalist is, and they crowded around this like poster, and they were just like jumping up and down, like super excited because it is. And then I talked to the artist, and they were like, "My work has never been out in the world like this. You know, like this has never happened." And so just this like moment, and then like her partner who took the photo of her that was on display, he was like, "This is insane for me. Like this is so big." Had this big hug. It just was like this beautiful moment, and that's what I think people need. It's like the people who are making work everywhere, not just New Orleans, are so special and doing incredible things. And so we just want to elevate those people. And I think what we're starting with that is like, let's get artists resources. And so we've got lots of stories around that, like artists getting grants, finding, we've heard stories of bandmates, bands being formed from artists finding each other, musicians finding artists to do their album artwork on Cultural. Somebody just moved to Lafayette and didn't know any of the artists and used Culturalist to like tap in and connect with a bunch of artists. So we get these anecdotal stories about that. But I think seeing that in real life of just like this artist be so pumped, was like, damn, yeah, it was such a cool moment. So that's what we want to do, is just like all of these everywhere, worldwide, people are creating. And so how can we make it so that like, they're just easier to find and get all the resources they need?
That's dope. That is so cool. I always get tickled because I've been doing this so long, and I'm not completely jaded yet. I always get tickled when I'll have an artist on, and they're like, "This is my first podcast. This is the first time someone was interested and had me on, and they have nerves." And then I'm like, I'm nervous as well because this is blind dating, but for creatives or what have you. And yeah. I can, I don't get a lot of press here for doing this sort of like project or what have you. And, in those instances, you celebrate those wins, you celebrate those instances, because it's not really me. Like, as you can see in the background of this my screen, it's a cartoon of me that I had a local artist do. Mm-hmm. So it's that, right? And I remember one of those instances, I was in one of our arts districts, and they have this big LED board, and me, my dad and brother in the car, he's driving through, and then my dad sees a big, like 50, 75 foot, like LED of me pop up on there. Damn. Stops the car, and I'm like, this is a green light. What are you doing? And he's like, "Oh, that's you." And I was like, "Yeah, it is." And it's one of those moments. And oh, man. I would imagine that LED board is kind of one of those sorts of, you're starting to make it. And yeah. I've heard from different artists, especially at the art school here and Micah here, that, being on this podcast in some instances is kind of like, you made it. People are noticing you. And I'm like, okay, that's a responsibility. That's a duty there. People are gassing it up when their interview is dropping. So, taking that responsibility is it's all of it. And, the other thing, that I think is really interesting and really impactful is, again, going back to my vision comment, where, there are entities, there are nonprofits, things of that nature that could help move something along, can help, with their name and their sort of infrastructure, help an artist do their thing or help a project get off the ground. And again, it's not a priority, but from what you're, describing with Culturalyst and providing that sort of like, here's, portfolio access, here's this network, here are these, RFP or these grants. That's something that people just miss, because what it is we're creating. We're so busy creating and doing our work and going through that process that I don't have time to write up an application for a grant that's going to get rejected.
Exactly. I guess I'll say one more thing on that point. Like, that is a really good example of like, there's barriers to accessing resources for artists. Either like there's gatekeepers that keep certain information to themselves, whether that's like purposeful or just because their newsletter is only a certain type of person, or they have to scour all these different lists to find something that they might qualify for. So I think just like the logistics, like the wiring and the plumbing of art information and opportunities in this country is just not as efficient as it should be. And that's like nationally, it's just like, it's not, the plumbing should be there so that like everything, a little art center in New Haven, Connecticut can share a little call to artists that if an artist in Baton Rouge is eligible, they should be able to find out about that. And right now they just can't, because every organization and artist is limited by their own digital radius that they fight for, so.
Yeah, I run into it all the time, and describing kind of how I do this stuff. If it's like I'm gonna be at a physical location in New Haven, Connecticut, or in Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm coming from here, but literally I'm intentionally doing a series of interviews in that city with those artists, then how can we collaborate on it? How can we make that happen? And it's still a version of no, but it's not a well thought out thing. And you talked about coding earlier. I'm a data analyst by day, so you mentioned coding. I was like, activation. I've been a data analyst as long as I've been a podcaster. They've been hand in hand. And I just look at it, I was like, that's a bad answer. And it's like, oh, we just has to be in this, like, you got to think this through a little bit more.
Exactly. As a data analyst, it's like, this is like gets me so fired up. It's like, we don't know how many artists live anywhere, like nowhere. And we don't know what they need. And like, we have assumptions about what they need, but like really when it comes to like doing good research and evaluation, like asking the people what they need, or like, understanding how many grants are available, or like what's going on, the data in the arts field is diffuse and siloed. And it's just like it's just because there's a whole bunch of reasons why, but it's like we inherited this like sort of individualistic approach to like building technologies. So everyone builds their own thing, and that's it. Just like as a result, there's so many wasted resources, and we don't know what each other is doing.
Yeah, I mean, I've even looked at doing this in this sort of upcoming season. There were a few folks, because I think there's value in it, that I might offer up some guest slots of you host a few episodes, you take this over, and kind of spreading the wealth. And I'll be there as a producer helping, from one capacity. I got bit by the bug. I'm teaching a group of students how to podcast. I have like a group of students that I'm working with. And and my partner was like, do they call you Mr. Lee? I was like, they do. And I don't like it. I love it, but I don't like it. And she was like, oh, you're like a teacher now. And I was like, don't do that. It's dangerous minds. Where's my leather jacket?
Yeah, I'm a badass teacher.
But yeah, it is one of those things of, and I spoke with one of the students today about it. And I was like, if I can do anything from my vantage point to help you, I was like, here's the sort of quick and dirty of how you get these things done, and don't abide by this is the professional way of doing it, or this is my master class. It's like people are finessing, and I was like, here's directly to the tap. I'm a working regular podcaster. This is how you get it done. And that's what it is. And I never thought that I would want to be working with students like 14-year-olds, and then having more opportunities there, because in it I hear often that Black male teachers in Baltimore is a limited number. It's not a huge number. So I don't have a teaching degree, I have a business degree, but in terms of being like a subject matter expert in this particular area and talking about it and knowing it, yeah, sure, why not? Let's do it. Let's make it happen if I can help.
That's so inspiring. I love that.
So let's see. I got like 3 more real questions. I want to shift a little bit to New Orleans from a sort of macro lens, right? As we were talking about earlier, I was sitting here marking out about how much I enjoy New Orleans, how much I love New Orleans. It's my second favorite city. I mean, Baltimore's always Baltimore. But what factors contribute to making New Orleans cultural scene like so, I hate the word vibrant, but I'll use it in this instance, vibrant and strong, resilient, because I see those connections between Baltimore and New Orleans in those particular ways. So from your vantage point, what do you think, maybe other words to come to mind too, but what are some of those factors that contribute to New Orleans's like cultural identity?
There's a quote from an artist here who goes by Phlegm. And the quote goes, everything you love about New Orleans is because of Black people. And that was like an anthem that it just like really resonated with people here, because it's true. It's like this city, the culture is a direct result of the people who live here like alchemizing all the things they went through and go through into creativity into joy, and sort of expressing what they've been through, expressing their emotion. And I think that's what the city like has a magic to it, because the people here have been through so much and have transformed their experience and continue to do so. And that there's like this aliveness that you feel when you get here. And I think that's why it's so important to take care of the people who create culture, because it's all it is. It's just people living in the living, impacted in the ways they're impacted, processing those experiences. So I think that, and I say this as like I'm a 30-something white dude not from New Orleans, and so a lot of my work has been, like recognizing that there's been a history of folks arriving to New Orleans and like being really extractive with the culture. And so a lot of my work here is about like recognizing that, or just like understanding that history has played out here. And so it's just super important to like listen to what the city is telling you, and I think I have been so drawn to this work because of my own experiences, which we spoke about earlier. But I came here as an 18-year-old, and it was the first place I came in college. It was the summer after my freshman year of college. And I was living alone and fishing a lot, working for this nonprofit in St. Bernard Parish, which is right next to Orleans Parish, but living in New Orleans. And it was just sort of the first summer that I was like, whoa, like I'm alive, like, and I'm in this city, and just watching how to carry both like grief from my mom and like how to like combine that with joy, and like just the way that New Orleans does those things and balances those things. And like, it's like astounding. And I think I was like, I have to be here because like this city teaches me so much. And it can be a hard place to live for various reasons, as everywhere it can be. We've got our shit too, excuse my language, but yeah. So I think that's New Orleans is special because of its people, and that's why it's critical that the city takes, because there's been gentrification here. There's been an influx of people that want to be close to that culture, myself included, and that changes things, changes who lives in what neighborhoods. So all of that is at play here in a big way. And so I think our effort just continues to be like, let's listen to what the people need here who create culture, and let's centralize things so they can get access. That's like as just the bare minimum of what we should be doing as a city.
Well, thank you for that. And you actually made my job a little bit easier. You kind of knocked out one of my other questions, so I have one last real question, and it's a good piggyback to sort of that last response. New Orleans continues to grow, right, and evolve. Like I think a lot of these cities, there's no secret, out there about it. How do you see the city preserving its unique cultural identity while embracing like progress and development? Because I find like, I see it happening here in Baltimore, and at times it feels like it's trying to copy, in some instances, other cities. And I'll give you this scenario. You might like it. There's so many times I go to brunch up here, and they're like, "This is our shrimp and grits." I was like, "This is not shrimp and grits." Okay. And I get really persnickety about it. and it's something like that. When you go to a place, you're like, no, though, this is a thing that's very, connected to the culture, whether it's low country or whatever the thing is, it's very connected in that way. And when you're putting your spin on it, it's like you're losing pieces of that culture. You're losing some of those references. And I'm talking about food in that instance, but something more broad, like a cultural component. How does a place grow while keeping the stuff that keeps it cool and keeps it that tourist attraction? That's sort of the thing.
That that is like the question, and I think it's like you could spend a whole lifetime, I think, trying, and I may do that, who knows, but like the idea of like, how do you both preserve has made a place so special, as well as make room for growth without sacrificing that, without like undermining the root of like magic. I think, yeah, it's just like an ongoing discovery, an ongoing conversation. And I think, not to reiterate what I said earlier, but like it feels to me like whenever I get heady with that kind of question, I'm like, okay, how do we just simplify that? Let's just simplify it. And to me, it always comes back to just like, we need to be taking care of people. And if we can do that well, and when I say well, like there's like many bullet points inside of that word well. Like, what does well mean? How do you care for people well? It's by listening to them. It's by like building spaces that are safe, and that like that aren't sacrificed to economic progress for like the comfort and health of citizenship. There's a whole bunch of stuff in caring for a people well, that I think we need to holistically approach that. Like, there's a project that might happen in my neighborhood where the Army Corps of Engineers wants to replace this lock system in this canal. And it's a 15-year project that would disrupt all the neighborhoods around it. And it's those kind of projects that like I just don't want New Orleans to have a short view on, because it's going to impact people that's a huge chunk of time that neighborhoods will be totally disrupted, and people who lived in these neighborhoods will be disrupted. So I think, just to simplify it, it's like, if you continue to care for the people who are from a place, that give a place its identity, then you can align, like you can hope, what you can do is like take care of those people, and then trust that those people will honor that and recognize that, and then will continue to like give back and give themselves to that city, into that community. I think there's probably some rule book or manual on how to do this, like in terms of bullet point, in terms of like programmatic things to get done. But for me, it's that simple. It's like, let's take care of the people. And if people feel like they're being cared for and listened to and respected, they'll care for each other better, and they'll care for newcomers better. Yeah. And then those newcomers arrive and they influence the culture in the ways they will, and then things will grow and change and evolve. So that's kind of that's kind of like an answer that is hard to pin down a little bit for me, but it's just like, that's the work, is like trying to figure that out. And we're doing what I think is our part to like, let's build a foundation on which any and every creative and artist and person who wants to be one can step into and get resources and feel supported and get community. And let's start with that. That's our effort. That's our, like, what we can do to take care of what is New Orleans culture, and what is every place's culture. And if we can do that well, then maybe, we can both balance the roots of the magic with the progress that's inevitable.
I think that's a great answer. And I think the way that you were describing it, it still lends to this notion that it's a living, breathing thing. This sort of approach. It can't just be this one cure-all and we'll revisit it later. No, let's figure it out. And I think being able to welcome folks in, but also not just everyone that comes through for sort of like, extracting, right? That's not kind of what we're looking for. And I don't know, in certain organizations, certain like businesses, you might leave a job and they do like an exit survey. I wonder if there's an equivalent, like, so for you artists that have left, what is your main reason? And you hear like maybe lack of resources, lack of structure, lack of support. And in the sort of like conversations I've had anecdotally speaking, it is those sort of things. And that ties back to what you were describing a moment ago, those sort of bullet points under well. And if folks feel like they're treated well, they're going to imprint on a place, and they're going to give what they have to a place. And, That's literally what I was talking about earlier, as far as my experience being in New Orleans, the times that I've been down there. Like I don't say it as gas, like even if I'm just some guy working in a college, it's like, yo, Tulane, what's good? Like, can I can I get in? And that's a thing, but also it's a real consideration leaving home, leaving this place that I've had this long relationship with and have had those ups and downs. But when it comes to sort of thinking through opportunities, it's a city that's in a renaissance, but there are folks that are kind of being left out of that renaissance. And you see like outside influences, whether it be a DC, whether it be a New York, coming in and kind of impacting how the people who are already doing the work of what it means to be in the arts, the culture community here, they're having an impact on it. It's making it a little bit more challenging for folks, and they don't feel supported. And I've had these conversations with folks, and that ties back to kind of what you were touching on. Like if people feel like they're being treated well, and that there is that quote unquote vibrancy that everyone puts in their mission statements, I think it works out, and I think you're able to keep things that feel real. And I'll leave on this before I go into these rapid fire questions with you. Like Starbucks are chains, right? And I remember going to a Starbucks on my birthday when I was with one of my buddies, and we shared a room. He's a chronic snorer, and I was like, I'm not gonna be asleep. And so I wake up and I have my like, you have a Starbucks reward for your birthday. So I go to the Starbucks. I think it was on Canal Street or what have you. And I was like, all right, this is great. This is great. This feels like a New Orleans Starbucks. It's haunted. This is great. This is absolutely a New Orleans Starbucks. And it's something that's sanitized and it's franchised as a Starbucks, but it still had that sort of New Orleans tinge to it. And that's the thing, something like that, that's a brand from Seattle. It still hits, based on the place that it's at.
No, totally. I mean, I think that the Starbucks being on Canal is inevitable. That's the world we're in.
Yeah.
And so the fact that like you felt this it infused with New Orleans culture is really special and speaks to the power of the place. But I think we can't like we also it's like I was thinking more about that question, and as you were responding, things you made me think about is like it's like a relationship. Like we just have to know that there's no like the moments of like homeostasis when like everything's good. Like those moments exist, but it's also going to be a constant conversation and ups and downs between like within a city. And we just have to be mindful of like both the balance of like listening to the folks who have been here and lived here, listening to the folks who just moved, honoring both voices, and recognizing the context within all this is playing out, which is like a racist, historically racist context. But that, if we can take care of the people in the place, then like whether Starbucks comes there or whoever comes there, it's still going to be that place because we care for the people.
Yeah, and I mean, I did get a smoked sausage latte when I was there, so no, I'm kidding. So thank you for indulging the real questions. This was really really great to chat. And now it's time to sort of piss away all of that goodwill, right? With my rapid fire questions. So you know how rapid fire goes. These are kind of like the back end, right? Almost like these were icebreaker questions, but I decided to leave it at the end instead of like immediately pissing off the guests. So here's the first one. Don't overthink it.
Okay.
So from your vantage point, what is the one dish is the spirit of New Orleans?
Red beans and rice.
You get it. You absolutely get it. I had this, I don't really talk to strangers a lot, but I found out I talk to more strangers when I go to New Orleans, just people like, hey man, you look familiar. And I was like, I don't, but go on. And I remember I was at a Piggly Wiggly or something like years and years ago. Like maybe the first time I was down there, it was a guy who was a chef. He basically told me how to make red beans and rice. This was the conversation. So absolutely.
Well, it's made every Monday. It's like you walk into a bar in New Orleans on a Monday and it's just free. It's like in a little catering dish, like on a little collapsible table at the back of the bar, like just there, because that's what the city's about. Is like red beans and rice is a Monday thing. You make it, it lasts a couple days. It's like a really affordable meal to make. You just like get fed at a bar. It's great.
it's funny you mentioned I didn't know that detail because I've never in the times I've gone, I've never been there on a Monday. So this is the next one. I'm really into pop culture, and I try to infuse a bit of me in these questions. What recent sort of pop culture or social media trend has has most impacted like New Orleans's art? Like, is there more like people that you're encountering from the art scene in New Orleans, are they using social media in this way, or is it a particular TV show or what have you that has an impact on maybe, we're on a strike right now, but maybe folks filming there in New Orleans? What sort of pop culture social media trend has had the most impact in New Orleans?
Oh no, Rob. I don't know. I blow it on the second one. I
That's all good.
I think I'm trying purposely to to unplug from social media because it feels like really extractive to my ability to pay attention to anything.
Sure.
I think there have been some there was a hip hop song that came through. Now the name is I'll send it to you, but a hip hop song came through. I think through TikTok that really popped off here in the last few months, where people were adding it to their TikToks or whatever. Now I can't remember the name, but it was it was from the West Bank. I remember it I was like, oh wow, TikTok is making some waves in the West Bank. But again, I'm blowing it with this because I don't remember the name.
Absolutely, no, it's all good. So I got two left.
Okay.
What is the place for you? I like to walk wherever I go. When I visit a new city, I'm walking, and I'm looking for sort of those moments of inspiration. I'll say when I was in Austin, Texas, it was during a heat wave, so it was 106 on average, which was goofy. And I remember walking in I think the old East Austin, right? And I saw a bumper sticker, and it's been on my mind a lot recently. I saw a bumper sticker and I got inspiration from it. And it mentioned art is the new magic. So I worked that into a question for the interviews I was doing later that day. So what is that area that, in New Orleans that, or even abroad, that you've gotten the most inspiration from, or at least something that shows up in your work?
For me, it's always been the oak trees in New Orleans. And you're talking about a physical place, right, Rob?
Yeah.
The oak trees in New Orleans, being in the city of New Orleans at dusk and at or dawn, you feel like that's when I felt the moment I spoke to earlier, I was 18, whoa, where am I? I am alive. And I'm just a beast out here. I'm just a mammal out here in nature. There's this part of City Park that if you go to at the right angle, there's this field of oak trees, all of them with Spanish moss. And if you stand at a certain angle, you can block out all the streetlights with the trees. And so you're just looking at this field, and it's there's steam rising off the grass, and there's there's a fog coming from the lake. And it's there's this warm air that blows through the city that feels really Caribbean. That still every time, it happened last night. I was sitting in my garden, got the breeze, just there's something that lifts your soul. And so I think I remain really inspired by that. I think it also really inspires lots of artists here because lots of work is around that speaks to the magic, speaks to the nature here. And then what those oak trees have seen is also really inspiring to think about, how much history and how many people that have come through and in their moments felt they were I'm alive, I'm 18. How many different versions of me have there been, just living and trying to process and trying to be in this swamp. It's just so astounding to think about. Yeah.
This is the last one, and you mentioned a piece of this. So I might as well follow up on it. What do you grow in your garden? What are a couple of things you grow in your garden?
Oh, I got buku fruit trees right now. I mean, right now I planted them 5 years ago. But I got a grapefruit, a satsuma, a lemon, a lime, and a fig. And
nice.
At this point now they're 8 feet tall. They've got like some thickness to them. The trunk. I bought them when they were little itty bitty things, or bought them. The city of New Orleans gave them away. It was shut out to that program. Gave away fruit trees to anyone who wanted them. So yeah, I spent a lot of time back there. Just like I put in a bunch of veggies this year. It was my first real year of like, let me prepare the soil, let me like plant stuff from seed. Had very little success. I had like, maybe 5 tomatoes, and like I did better with peppers. Had a lot of hot peppers.
Nice.
And basil is on deck all the time because I got and rosemary. But it's a really nice like place to go and unwind. And I'm experimenting with there's a blueberry bush right next to this like flowering like perennial here. I need to my next mission is to get better with these plant names. But yeah, it's just a place to like experiment and know that like things are going to fail, and then things are going to work, and then you're just like in conversation with those things, and like you would be with an art piece. Like you're just like out there and consistently being out there. You like just get a sense for how these plants and trees are responding to the elements and to you and your care. And it's just a really helpful way to ground myself as I try to do this work to like care for the artist community.
That's great, and thank you for that extra texture there at the end. So with that, I want to thank you for coming on to this podcast. This has been a treat. This has been totally a treat. And I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners anything you want in the final moments, website, things of that nature. The floor is yours.
Rob, thank you so much for having me. This is actually my first podcast.
So, that was great.
This is awesome for me. And yeah, I would love if folks check out Culturalyst. The list part is with a Y. It's short for Cultural Catalyst, because we're trying to catalyze culture by taking care of the people who create it. And love for people to check that out. We're in the process of growing right now. And but as I've been trying to say throughout this conversation, we want to serve the people, serve artists. And so to hear from them and hear what they need and hear what they think of this idea of this networked approach to discovery and to resourcing would mean a lot. So you can reach out to me. My information is on the website. And yeah, thanks so much again, Rob. This has been a real pleasure for me.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Sam Bowler from Culturalyst for coming on. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.